I am Maya, 31 years old, and my parents banned me from Thanksgiving dinner because my blue-collar job would embarrass my sister's high society boyfriend. I did not scream or cry. I just smiled, handed my mother the keys to our holiday cabin, and told her I completely understood. She left my workshop thinking she won, totally unaware I had just handed her a one-way ticket to public humiliation. She also had no idea I was secretly the executive director of the $19 million trust fund my sister planned to use to secure her perfect engagement. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic family members a lesson they will never forget. The air in my architectural salvage workshop was thick with the smell of aged oak and sawdust. I was restoring a beautiful 19th century mahogany mantelpiece, wearing heavy denim overalls and steel-toed boots covered in grime. That was when the heavy iron door of my shop swung open, letting in a gust of crisp November wind and the sharp, unmistakable scent of expensive Chanel perfume. My mother Margaret stepped into the workshop. She was wearing a pristine cream-colored cashmere coat and a pair of Christian Louboutin heels that clicked sharply against the concrete floor. She immediately pulled a monogrammed silk handkerchief from her designer bag and pressed it against her nose, looking around my workspace, as if she had just stepped into a biohazard zone. I set down my sanding block and wiped my hands on a rag, waiting for the inevitable critique. I did not have to wait long. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about my day. She walked straight up to my workbench, keeping a safe distance so the sawdust would not ruin her immaculate outfit. Do not bother packing a bag for this weekend, Maya. You are not coming to Thanksgiving dinner this year. Her voice was flat, completely devoid of any maternal warmth. I stared at her, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest, but I kept my face perfectly blank. I asked her why I was suddenly uninvited from a holiday tradition we had kept for my entire life. Margaret sighed heavily, rolling her eyes as if my existence was an exhausting burden she was forced to bear. Your sister Chloe is bringing Julian to meet the family. She said his name with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. He is white, he comes from a very prestigious, wealthy family, and Chloe simply does not want you there ruining the image we have worked so hard to build. Julian is used to a certain caliber of people. He is an investor, a man of high society. And what are you? Look at you. You are a manual laborer. You dig through other people's trash for a living. Your blue-collar job and your wretched, unkempt appearance would humiliate her. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. We are a respectable, successful African-American family, Maya. We have an image to uphold in our community. I will not let you drag us down and ruin your sister's chances of marrying into the Kensington family. You are a disgrace to everything your father and I have built. Just stay here in the dirt where you belong. For 31 years, I had been the scapegoat of the Williams family. While Chloe was the golden child showered with praise, expensive clothes, and endless financial bailouts, I was the one whose achievements were constantly belittled. When I built my estate appraisal and architectural salvage business from the ground up, they called it junk collecting. They never bothered to look past the sawdust to see the highly lucrative elite empire I had actually created. I looked at my mother's harsh, unyielding face. A younger version of me would have cried. A younger version of me would have begged for her approval, offering to buy a new dress, promising to sit quietly in the corner and speak only when spoken to. But that girl had died a long time ago. Instead of arguing, I reached into the deep pocket of my denim overalls. I pulled out a heavy silver keyring holding 2 brass keys and tossed it through the air. Margaret caught the keys, automatically pulling her handkerchief away from her face in surprise. "What is this?" she demanded, looking at the brass keys resting in her manicured palm. "Those are the keys to the Aspen Mountain cabin," I said, my voice perfectly steady and calm. "I know you and Dad were planning to host Julian there for the long weekend to show off the family property. I had them polished for you." "I understand completely, Mom. I will stay far away from your perfect Thanksgiving." Margaret smiled, a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk spreading across her face. She slipped the keys into her designer handbag. "I am glad you are finally learning to be reasonable and know your place, Maya. It is for the best." With that, she turned on her red lacquered heels and marched out of my workshop, the heavy iron door slamming shut behind her. She drove away believing she had won. She firmly believed the Aspen cabin belonged to her and my father. She did not know that when they quietly went bankrupt 2 years ago, I was the anonymous buyer who purchased the property from the bank to save them from eviction. I took out my phone and dialed a private number. Aspen Security, a voice answered. "This is Maya Williams, the property owner," I said, wiping a speck of dust from my screen. "Please change the biometric locks on the main gates immediately. If anyone with the last name Williams attempts to enter the property this Thursday, deny them access and activate the trespass protocol." The heavy iron door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone with the sharp scent of sawdust and the lingering echoes of my mother's insults. I stood perfectly still, waiting until the sound of her luxury car engine faded down the street and disappeared into the distance. Then I turned away from the half-sanded mahogany mantelpiece I had been working on. I walked to the back of my dusty workshop, passing stacks of reclaimed lumber and salvaged stained glass windows that my family considered nothing more than garbage. I stopped in front of a seemingly ordinary weathered brick wall. Reaching up to a hidden panel concealed behind a rusted iron bracket, I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy brick wall slid open with a soft mechanical hiss, revealing a space my parents and sister could not even begin to fathom. My hidden office was a masterclass in modern luxury and high-end technology, a stark contrast to the gritty exterior of my salvage yard. Floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass overlooked the bustling city skyline. A massive polished walnut desk sat in the center of the room, surrounded by multiple glowing monitors, displaying live stock markets, real estate portfolios, and international banking feeds. I stepped inside and the secret door sealed shut behind me, completely blocking out the noise of the industrial district. I walked into the adjoining decontamination mudroom, stripping off my dusty denim overalls and kicking off my heavy steel-toed boots. I washed the grime from my hands with hot water, dried them carefully, and slipped into a tailored blazer that hung waiting for me. In an instant, the manual laborer my mother so deeply despised vanished. The ruthless corporate executive took over. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and tapped the secure line on my desk console. The phone rang exactly twice before my lead attorney in Manhattan answered the call. "Good afternoon, Maya David," said his voice crisp, alert, and entirely professional. "I assume this is not a social call." "It is not a social call, David," I replied, pulling a thick velvet-bound legal file from my locked top drawer. "I need you to activate the morality clause of the Josephine Trust immediately. Chloe and my parents have officially crossed the line." There was a brief, loaded silence on the other end of the secure line. "Are you absolutely certain about this step?" David asked, lowering his voice. "Once we initiate this specific protocol, the asset freeze is instantaneous across all banking platforms. There is no turning back from this." "I am absolutely certain," I said, my voice ice-cold and unshakable. "My mother just banned me from our family Thanksgiving dinner because my presence would apparently embarrass Chloe's new high society white boyfriend. They explicitly stated my working-class status makes me a disgrace to the family image and that I am not fit to sit at the same table as them. That hits every single trigger point Aunt Josephine outlined in Section 4 of the trust agreement. Aunt Josephine was my father's older sister and the only actual self-made multimillionaire in our entire extended family tree. While my parents obsessed over country club memberships, designer labels, and pretending to be old money aristocrats, Aunt Josephine built a massive logistics and shipping empire from absolute scratch. She despised my parents for their shallow, vanity-obsessed lifestyle. She saw right through their fake smiles and their desperate need to impress high society. But more importantly, she saw exactly how they treated me. When she passed away last year, my parents threw a lavish memorial pudding on a grand performance of grief, fully expecting to inherit her massive estate. They thought Chloe, the beautiful, perfectly groomed golden child, would be handed the keys to the kingdom without lifting a finger. They had absolutely no idea that Aunt Josephine had quietly come to my salvage yard 3 months before her death, sat on a wooden crate in the dust, and handed me the reins to her entire $19 million fortune. Aunt Josephine knew my family was incredibly toxic, so she created a brutal, inescapable trap. The trust stipulated that Chloe would only receive her massive inheritance if I, the sole executive director, deemed her morally fit to handle the wealth. The morality clause explicitly stated that if Chloe or my parents ever humiliated, isolated, or alienated me based on my career or my lifestyle, Chloe would be stripped of every single penny. I looked down at the heavy legal documents spread across my polished walnut desk. My name was printed in bold, undeniable letters at the very top: Maya Williams, Chief Executive Officer and sole executor. I held the absolute power to distribute or completely withhold $19 million. And today my own mother had gladly walked into my shop and handed me the exact ammunition I needed to execute the final blow. "Draft the termination paperwork right now, David," I instructed, staring at the flashing financial numbers on my monitors. "Freeze the preliminary escrow accounts Chloe has been borrowing against to fund her lavish shopping sprees. Alert the international banks that the primary beneficiary status is currently under executive review and halt all pending credit lines. But do not notify my family yet. Let them enjoy their fancy Thanksgiving dinner at my mountain cabin. Let them play their upper-class games and impress this new boyfriend. I want the reality of their absolute bankruptcy to hit them right when they think they have won." "Consider it done, Maya," David replied, a strong hint of professional respect in his tone. "The trap is officially set. I will have the court documents ready for your signature by tomorrow morning." I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of calm wash over me. For my entire life, I had swallowed their vicious insults. I had let them hide me away like a dirty, shameful secret. I had stayed quiet while they celebrated Chloe for simply breathing. But the game had fundamentally changed. My phone buzzed sharply on the desk, shattering the silence of the office. The screen lit up with a text message from Chloe. I picked it up and read the words my sister had hastily typed out. "Mom told me she handled you today. Do not even try to show your face at Aspen and ruin my big day with Julian. He is way out of your league and you are a complete embarrassment to us. Just know your place and stay in your dirty little shop." I read the cruel message twice. A genuine bright smile broke across my face. She was so confident, so deeply arrogant, entirely unaware that the dirty little shop she was mocking housed the very person who controlled her entire financial existence. "Know your place," I whispered softly to myself, staring directly at the $19 million trust portfolio on my computer screen. "Oh, Chloe, you are about to learn exactly where your place really is." I did not reply to her vicious message. I did not need to defend myself or argue with a woman who was already financially ruined. I simply hit the delete button, locked my phone screen, and turned back to my work. The countdown to Thanksgiving had officially begun, and they had absolutely no idea the storm that was coming for them. Thanksgiving evening arrived with a quiet, peaceful elegance that I had not experienced in years. Far away from the dust and noise of my salvage yard, and safely removed from the suffocating judgment of my family, I sat in the sprawling living room of my downtown penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the city skyline, the glittering lights reflecting off the dark, icy river below. I poured myself a glass of vintage red wine, savoring the rich, heavy aroma. For the first time in my entire life, I was not spending the holiday shrinking into the background of my parents' performative dinner parties or serving as the punchline for their cruel jokes. I was entirely in my element, surrounded by the quiet, undeniable luxury I had built with my own two hands. The perfect tranquility shattered at exactly 8 o'clock. The private elevator chime echoed sharply through my foyer, followed immediately by a frantic, aggressive pounding on my heavy oak front door. My building concierge had called 2 minutes earlier, nervously explaining that my family was demanding entry and causing a massive scene in the grand lobby. I had authorized their access, knowing exactly why they were here, and fully prepared for the explosion. I set my wineglass down on the marble coffee table, smoothed the fabric of my silk loungewear, and walked slowly toward the foyer. I pulled the door open. My sister Chloe pushed her way inside before the door was even fully ajar, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. My mother Margaret and my father Richard stormed in right behind her. They were all wearing expensive winter coats, but their carefully crafted high society image was completely ruined by their frantic, disheveled appearance. Trailing behind them, looking incredibly uncomfortable and deeply confused, was Julian. He was exactly as my mother had described him, a tall, handsome white man, in a bespoke, tailored suit radiating the quiet confidence of old money. But right now, he just looked completely out of his element standing awkwardly in my entryway. "What the hell did you do?" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings of my penthouse. Her perfectly styled hair was messy and her expensive mascara was slightly smudged from crying. She pointed a trembling finger right at my face. We drove all the way up the mountain to Aspen with Julian. We had the private caterers arriving. We had everything perfectly planned. And when we got to the gates, armed security guards physically blocked our cars. They threw our designer luggage out into the snow right in front of Julian. They treated us like common criminals. "How dare you hack the security system of our parents' house?" My mother stepped forward, her face flushed with a toxic mixture of embarrassment and fury. She glared at me, her eyes darting around my luxurious penthouse for a split second before returning her hateful gaze to me. "You vindictive, jealous little brat!" Margaret hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You could not stand the fact that your sister was having a perfect Thanksgiving with a respectable man, so you had to find a way to humiliate us. You hacked the smart locks, did not you? You called the security company and pretended to be me. Turn over the new access codes right now, or your father is calling the police to have you arrested for cybercrime." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply looked at the three of them standing in my foyer, completely blinded by their own arrogance and delusion. Then I looked at Julian, who was standing near the doorway, his eyes scanning my face with a sudden strange intensity. "I did not hack anything, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm and utterly devoid of emotion. I walked over to the sleek console table near the entrance, picked up a thick legal folder, and tossed it casually onto the marble surface. It slid perfectly across the smooth stone, stopping right in front of my father. "I am the registered legal owner of the Aspen property. I have every right to change the locks on my own front door." My father let out a harsh, mocking laugh that bounced off the walls. "Your house. Have you lost your mind, Maya? I bought that cabin 15 years ago. You are nothing but a manual laborer. You could not afford the property taxes on that estate if you worked for 100 consecutive years. Open the folder." Richard, I commanded, dropping the title of Dad for the first time in my life. I watched his mocking smile falter as my authoritative tone cut through the room. He snatched the folder off the table and ripped it open. Chloe and Margaret leaned in close, their eyes frantically scanning the legal documents. I watched the exact moment the color drained completely from all three of their faces. The aggressive, entitled energy in the room evaporated instantly, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. "You see, Julian," I said, turning my attention to the man standing by the door. "My parents love to project the image of incredible, untouchable wealth. But 2 years ago, they made some terrible investments. They quietly went entirely bankrupt. The bank was 24 hours away from foreclosing on the Aspen property and throwing their belongings onto the street. They were terrified of the public humiliation. So I stepped in. I purchased the cabin directly from the bank in a blind, all-cash deal. I let them continue to use it rent-free to save their precious social standing. They have been my non-paying tenants for 24 months, and since they banned me from Thanksgiving, their free trial has officially expired." Chloe gasped, taking a step back as if the legal document had physically burned her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in violent denial. "No, that is impossible. You work in a filthy salvage yard. You do not have that kind of money." My father's face contorted into a mask of absolute, uncontrolled fury. The utter humiliation of being exposed as a financial fraud, especially in front of the wealthy white son-in-law he was so desperate to impress, completely shattered his fragile pride. He dropped the folder, letting the deed scatter across the hardwood floor. "You insolent, lying wretch!" Richard roared, stepping forward with his hand raised high. He lunged at me fully, intending to strike me across the face for daring to strip away his power and expose his deepest secrets. I stood my absolute ground, refusing to blink or step away. But the blow never landed. Before my father's heavy hand could even come close to my face, Julian moved with terrifying speed. He stepped forward and grabbed my father's wrist mid-air, his grip so incredibly tight that Richard let out a sharp gasp of pain. The entire room froze. My mother screamed, and Chloe stared in absolute shock as her perfect, refined boyfriend physically restrained her father. But Julian was not looking at Richard. He was not looking at Chloe or my mother. He was staring directly at me, his eyes wide, his chest heaving, his breathing shallow and rapid. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like he had just seen a ghost. Julian slowly released my father's wrist. Richard stumbled backward, clutching his arm and sputtering in indignant rage, but Julian completely ignored him. Julian took a hesitant step toward me, his expensive leather shoes entirely silent on my marble floor. He was trembling. The sophisticated, untouchable aura of wealth he had carried into my home just moments ago had completely evaporated. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into the dark abyss. "M.L. Williams," Julian whispered, his voice cracking on the syllables. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against the crisp collar of his custom-tailored shirt. "You are Maya Williams. You are the executive director of the J Trust. You are the person who personally rejected my $10 million emergency bailout package at exactly 3:00 last Tuesday afternoon." The luxurious foyer of my penthouse plunged into an absolute suffocating silence. The air grew so thick it felt incredibly hard to breathe. My mother stared at Julian, her perfectly painted lips parted in utter confusion. My father blinked rapidly, his anger momentarily derailed by the sheer absurdity of the statement he had just heard. "What are you talking about, Julian?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull his attention back to her. "What is the J Trust? Why are you calling her an executive director? She is just a pathetic manual laborer. She works in a dirty salvage yard. She does not have $10 million. Tell me you are joking." I did not give Julian the chance to answer her frantic questions. I walked over to the custom velvet sofa in the center of my living room and sat down gracefully, crossing my legs. I picked up my crystal glass of vintage red wine and took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the tension in the room stretch until it was almost unbearable. I looked at the panicked, handsome white man standing in my foyer and offered him a freezing, razor-sharp smile. "The world is incredibly small, is it not, Julian?" I said, my voice echoing clearly across the open space of the penthouse. "I must admit, when I read your frantic loan application last week, I did not immediately connect the Julian Kensington of Kensington Holdings to the wonderful new boyfriend my naive sister would not stop bragging about. But when my mother practically shoved your family pedigree in my face this afternoon, all the pieces finally snapped together." I took another sip, watching the sweat begin to bead on his forehead. "My poor, foolish sister actually thought you were her knight in shining armor. She thought you were her golden ticket into elite society." Chloe's face flushed a violent shade of crimson. "Shut up, Maya!" she shrieked, stomping her foot on the floor like a petulant toddler. "You are lying. Julian comes from old money. His family owns half the commercial real estate in the city. He is a multimillionaire." I set my wine glass down on the table with a soft, definitive clink. I reached underneath the glass coffee table and pulled out a thick black leather folder. I tossed it onto the surface right next to the deed for the Aspen cabin. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "He was a multi-millionaire, Chloe." I corrected her, gently tapping my manicured fingernail against the black leather cover. "I highly suggest you open that file. It contains the comprehensive risk assessment report my financial analysts compiled on Kensington Holdings last week." Your perfect wealthy boyfriend is completely drowning in toxic debt. His primary commercial development project went bankrupt 6 months ago. He has leveraged every single asset his family owns, maxed out predatory corporate loans, and he is currently under active investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for massive fundraising fraud. Julian flinched physically as the letters FBI left my mouth. He took another step backward, putting extra distance between himself and my family. He is completely broke. Chloe, I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. In fact, his net worth is currently sitting at negative $12 million. He is desperate, and a desperate man will do absolutely anything to save himself from a federal prison sentence. He only approached you, he only charmed you, and asked you to marry him because your parents could not stop bragging at their country club that you were the sole heir to Aunt Josephine's $19 million estate. He does not love you, Chloe. He loves the inheritance he thought you were going to bring him. He was planning to use your trust fund to pay off his fraudulent debts and keep himself out of a federal penitentiary. The silence that followed was absolute. My parents looked as though the floor had just dropped out from beneath them. Margaret pressed her hand to her chest, breathing heavily as she stared at the man she planned to parade around her social circle. Richard looked completely lost, his eyes darting from the black folder to Julian's pale, terrified face. Chloe shook her head violently. "No," she gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "No, that is not true. It is a lie. Maya is just jealous. She forged all of this because she is a miserable, lonely failure who wants to ruin my happiness." She turned to Julian, her hands desperately grabbing the lapels of his expensive suit jacket. "Tell them it is a lie, Julian." She begged, her voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob. "Tell them you have money. Tell them you love me. Tell them this is just one of Maya's sick, twisted games. Please, Julian. Just tell them she is lying." Julian looked down at Chloe's desperate, tear-stained face. He looked at her hands clutching his jacket. Then he looked past her, his eyes locking onto the black financial dossier sitting on my coffee table. He knew I had the exact evidence that could send him to prison for a very long time. He knew the game was completely over. Slowly, Julian reached up and grabbed Chloe's wrists. With a cold, brutal motion, he forcefully yanked her hands off his suit. He shoved her backward, creating a massive, undeniable physical barrier between them. He did not say a single word of comfort to her. He did not deny my accusations. Instead, his eyes darted around the room full of absolute panic, as his mind desperately calculated a new survival strategy. The physical distance Julian created when he forcefully shoved Chloe away should have been a massive wake-up call. Any rational woman would have looked at the terrified, sweating man standing in the foyer and realized he was a complete fraud. But my sister had spent 28 years living in an absolute fantasy world where she was the flawless center of the universe. Reality simply did not compute in her brain. Instead of questioning the man who had just violently rejected her touch to save his own skin, Chloe whipped her head around and locked her tear-filled eyes on me. Her sorrow instantly morphed into a blind, vicious rage. "You are so jealous of me!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing painfully against the glass windows of my penthouse. She lunged forward, pointing a manicured finger right at my chest. "You fabricated this entire financial report just to ruin my engagement. You cannot stand that I found a wealthy, handsome man who treats me like a queen while you are rotting away alone in that filthy woodshop. Look at yourself, Maya." She continued, her breathing erratic and heavy. "You are a manual laborer. Do you honestly expect anyone to believe you are a high-powered executive? You forged these papers to scare Julian away because you want me to be as miserable and pathetic as you are." Margaret rushed forward, wrapping her arms protectively around her hysterical golden child. She glared at me with a level of pure venom I had never seen before. "You are an absolute snake, Maya," my mother hissed. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay your own flesh and blood. You orchestrated this sick charade just to humiliate your sister in front of her fiancé. You are a disgrace to this family." My father stood behind them, nodding in agreement, his chest puffed out as he tried to regain his shattered authority. But Margaret was not finished. She looked over at Julian, offering him a sickeningly sweet, apologetic smile before turning her furious gaze back to me. "I do not know how you managed to fake these rejection letters," Margaret commanded, stepping toward my coffee table, "but you are going to fix this right now. If you somehow actually have access to this investment firm, you will log into your computer and approve Julian $10 million loan immediately. You will apologize to him, and you will transfer the Aspen property deed back to your father. Do it right now. Maya or I swear to God I will make sure you are entirely cut off from the Williams family forever." The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. My mother genuinely believed she could force me to hand over $10 million to a white con artist just to preserve her precious social climbing fantasies. I did not argue. I did not defend my career. I simply picked up the sleek silver remote resting on my coffee table. I pressed a single button. The automated blackout shades on my windows smoothly descended, plunging the bright room into a moody, cinematic darkness. Another press of the button and the massive 85-inch television mounted on the far wall flared to life. Chloe and my parents jolted backward, startled by the sudden shift. Julian remained frozen by the door, his eyes glued to the screen. "Since you refuse to believe the manual laborer," I said, leaning back into the soft, velvet cushions, "let us hear directly from the woman who actually funded this entire empire." The screen displayed a crisp, high-definition video recording of a formal legal office. Sitting at the center of a long mahogany table was Aunt Josephine. She looked exactly as she had in her final months, sharp, uncompromising, and radiating the absolute authority of a self-made African-American billionaire. She was wearing her signature emerald green suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, looking directly into the camera lens. Chloe gasped aloud. Margaret let out a strangled, breathless sound, her hands flying to her mouth. "This is the official video testament of Josephine Williams," my aunt voice boomed through the surround sound speakers, crisp and commanding. "I am recording this statement to prevent any legal confusion or challenges from my greedy, superficial relatives after my passing." My parents stiffened, the insult landing like a physical blow. "I have spent my entire life building my fortune," Aunt Josephine continued, leaning forward on the screen. "And I have spent the last 30 years watching my brother and his wife raise their daughters. I have watched them turn Chloe into a vain, entitled, useless socialite who cares only about designer labels and marrying into white wealth to validate her existence. And I have watched them treat Maya like dirt simply because she chose to work with her hands and build real, tangible character." Chloe let out a whimpering cry, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Therefore, my aunt's recorded voice grew even sterner, leaving zero room for misinterpretation. "I have placed my entire liquid estate, totaling exactly $19 million, into a blind trust. I have appointed Maya Williams as the sole executive director and executor of this fund. She alone controls every single penny." My mother's knees visibly buckled. My father had to grab her arm to keep her from collapsing onto my hardwood floor. "Chloe is listed as a conditional beneficiary," Aunt Josephine explained, staring fiercely into the camera lens. "However, Chloe will only receive her inheritance if Maya officially determines that she is morally and ethically fit to handle the wealth. I have instituted a strict morality clause. If Chloe, Margaret, or Richard ever engage in behavior that alienates, humiliates, or degrades Maya regarding her working-class lifestyle, if they ever exclude her from family events or treat her as a second-class citizen, the morality clause will be instantly triggered." The entire room stopped breathing. The only sound was the clear, undeniable voice of the deceased billionaire sealing their fate, echoing. The crisp, authoritative voice of Aunt Josephine continued to fill my penthouse, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. On the massive screen, my late aunt leaned closer to the camera lens. Her piercing gaze seemed to stare directly into the souls of the people standing in my living room. "Let me be perfectly clear about the consequences of the morality clause," Josephine declared, her tone sharp as shattered glass. "If Chloe, Margaret, or Richard commit a single act of discrimination against Maya regarding her career or her working-class aesthetic, the penalty is absolute. If they attempt to hide her away from their precious high society friends, or if they ban her from family gatherings to save their fragile egos, the trust will instantly dissolve. Chloe will be stripped of her beneficiary status. Her inheritance will be reduced to zero. The entire $19 million fortune will automatically and irreversibly transfer into Maya personal accounts as her sole unrestricted property. Maya will not owe this family a single explanation nor a single dime. The video concluded with a sharp beep and the large screen faded to an inky black. The automated window shades slowly hummed back to life, rising to reveal the glittering city skyline once again. But the atmosphere inside the penthouse was completely dead. Margaret let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her legs gave out completely. She slumped onto the edge of my glass coffee table, her pristine cashmere coat crumpling around her. She buried her face in her hands, her manicured fingers digging frantically into her hair. The horrifying reality was crashing down on her like a freight train. Just a few hours ago, she had proudly marched into my salvage yard. She had called my profession a disgrace to our respectable African-American family. She had explicitly banned me from the Thanksgiving dinner at the Aspen cabin because my presence would humiliate Chloe in front of her prestigious white boyfriend. My mother had not just insulted me. She had personally, voluntarily pulled the trigger on her golden child financial future. She had literally handed me $19 million on a silver platter just to protect her superficial pride. Richard was hyperventilating. His chest heaved erratically beneath his expensive winter coat. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire universe burn to ash. All their careful social climbing, all their desperate attempts to secure a wealthy son-in-law by flaunting a fake inheritance, it was all completely obliterated. I remained seated on the velvet sofa, keeping my posture relaxed and my expression perfectly neutral. I watched the scene unfold with a quiet, clinical detachment. Over by the foyer, Julian was going through a very different kind of realization. The color had not returned to his face, but his eyes were darting rapidly as his survival instincts kicked in. Julian was a desperate man staring down a federal investigation for massive fundraising fraud. He had calculated every single move he made with my sister. He had proposed to Chloe entirely based on the country club rumors of a massive guaranteed inheritance. Now he realized the brutal truth. Chloe was not a millionaire heiress. She was a broke, spoiled woman whose parents were secretly bankrupt and living rent-free in my property. She had zero access to the Josephine Trust. She had absolutely no leverage, no capital, and no value to him whatsoever. I watched Julian physically shift his weight. He took another deliberate step backward, inching closer to the front door. He looked at Chloe, who was still weeping loudly, and his expression was entirely devoid of affection or sympathy. It was the cold, calculating look of a predator realizing the trap was empty. He dropped his hands to his sides, completely disconnecting himself from the chaotic family drama unfolding before him. He was already planning his exit strategy. He did not utter a single word to comfort the woman he had asked to marry him just 2 weeks ago. The sound of Chloe desperate crying finally snapped my father out of his paralyzed state. Richard could not handle the humiliation. He could not accept that the daughter he had treated like an embarrassment was now holding the ultimate power over their lives. Richard straightened his posture forcefully, shoving his hands into his coat pockets to hide their trembling. He marched toward me, his face twisted in a desperate attempt to reclaim his patriarchal authority. He glared down at me, his jaw clenched so tightly, the muscles in his neck strained. "You really think you are so clever, Maya?" Richard snarled, his voice a low, threatening rumble that echoed across the quiet room. "You think you can just orchestrate this entire circus and walk away with our family money? You are out of your mind if you believe I will let a manual laborer steal my daughter's future." "I did not steal anything, Richard," I replied, my voice steady and unbothered. "Aunt Josephine set the rules. You and your wife chose to break them. Actions have consequences." "Do not you dare lecture me about the real world," he shouted, pointing an angry finger just inches from my face. "That video proves absolutely nothing. Josephine was a sick, bitter old woman. She was clearly suffering from severe dementia when she recorded that ridiculous statement." He leaned closer, his eyes burning with hatred. "I am going to hire the most ruthless litigation team in this city. I will drag you into federal court and expose this fraudulent scheme. I will have that trust invalidated due to mental incapacity. You are not going to get a single penny of that money. I looked at my father, watching the veins bulge in his neck as he screamed his empty threats in my pristine foyer. He was practically vibrating with rage, his fists clenched tight at his sides. My mother, Margaret, was still sobbing dramatically on the edge of my glass coffee table, trying to pull Chloe up from the floor. Chloe was completely unresponsive, staring blankly at the dark television screen as the reality of her evaporated $19 million inheritance finally set in. "You can hire whoever you want, Richard," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "But I suggest you use whatever is left of your credit limit to pay for a moving truck instead of a litigation team. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property in Aspen." My father let out a primal sound of pure frustration. He grabbed my mother by the arm, hauling her to her feet with rough, uncoordinated movements. Margaret stumbled, her designer heels slipping on the marble floor. She grabbed Chloe by the collar of her expensive coat, practically dragging my sister toward the private elevator. "You are going to pay for this!" "Maya," my father yelled over his shoulder as the polished steel doors of the elevator slid open. "You manipulated a sick, dying woman. You are a thief. We will completely destroy you in federal court. I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a prison cell." I did not bother to reply. I simply pressed the security button on the wall console. The heavy elevator doors slid shut, cutting off his unhinged shouting mid-sentence. The sudden silence that fell over my penthouse was absolute and incredibly satisfying. I noticed Julian had managed to slip into the elevator with them right before the doors closed, completely silent, like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. I walked back to the velvet sofa, picked up my glass of vintage wine, and took a long, celebratory sip. I was not afraid of my father's desperate threats. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city lights and pulled out my encrypted cell phone. I dialed my lead attorney David for the second time that day. He picked up on the first ring. "It is done," I said smoothly. "They took the bait perfectly. My parents have just declared open war. Richard is threatening to take me to federal court and invalidate the trust by claiming Aunt Josephine was suffering from severe dementia." David let out a dry, professional chuckle on the other end of the line. "Let him try, Maya." Aunt Josephine anticipated this exact move. Before she signed the trust documents, we had her examined by 3 separate board-certified neurologists at Mount Sinai. We have extensive date-stamped medical records and video depositions proving she was in flawless mental condition. Their dementia claim will be thrown out by a judge before it even reaches a hearing. "I know," I replied, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass. "But my parents are desperate now. They have heavily mortgaged their lives to maintain their fake high society image. They will try to play dirty. They will run a public smear campaign to try and strip me of my executive rights. I want you to prepare the absolute strongest defense portfolio possible. If they want a war in federal court, we are going to bury them under a mountain of undeniable legal evidence." "Understood," David said confidently. "I will have the entire team on standby. Enjoy your Thanksgiving, Maya. You have definitely earned it." I ended the call and spent the rest of the evening in total peace. I ordered a private dinner from a high-end restaurant down the street, enjoying my solitary holiday without the suffocating weight of my family's toxic judgment. But my quiet evening was interrupted just past midnight. My private cell phone buzzed loudly on my nightstand. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, assuming it was my mother calling from a burner phone to hurl more abuse. But curiosity got the better of me. I swiped the screen to answer. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Maya, it is Julian." His voice was entirely different from the smooth, arrogant tone he had used when he first walked into my home. Now he sounded frantic, breathless, and incredibly desperate. I sat up in bed, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "Julian," I said, making sure my tone was dripping with amusement. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this late-night call? Did my sister finally stop crying, or did you just leave her stranded somewhere?" "I am not with Chloe," he said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. "I left them at a hotel an hour ago. Listen to me, Maya. We need to make a deal. A mutually beneficial arrangement. A deal I repeated, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed and walking toward my home office. What kind of deal could a bankrupt fraudster possibly offer the executive director of a $19 million trust fund? I stepped into my office and immediately tapped the screen of my phone, activating the call recording application. A small red dot appeared, capturing every single word. "I know your father is planning to sue you," Julian said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "He was screaming about it the entire ride back from your building. He wants to drag you through the mud and prove you manipulated your aunt. But I can stop him. I can be your star witness, Maya." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely entertained by his pathetic hustle. "Is that so?" "Yes," Julian insisted eagerly. "I can testify in federal court on your behalf. I will swear under oath that Margaret and Richard confessed their financial bankruptcy to me. I will tell the judge exactly how Chloe plotted to use the Josephine Trust to fund her luxury lifestyle. I can prove they are gold diggers. I will give you everything you need to completely destroy their lawsuit and secure your money forever." "And what exactly is your price for this incredible loyalty, Julian?" I asked, leaning back against my desk. "I just need $5 million, he blurted out. "Just a $5 million bridge loan from the J Trust to save my commercial real estate project from foreclosure. You have 19 million sitting in those accounts, Maya. 5 million is a drop in the bucket for you, and it guarantees you keep the rest. It is a perfect trade." I let his pathetic, dirty offer hang in the air for a long moment. I looked at the red recording dot, blinking steadily on my phone screen, securing the definitive proof of his absolute betrayal. He was perfectly willing to sell out my sister and my parents to save his own skin, just as I knew he would. I let out a low, cold chuckle that made him instantly fall silent on the other end of the line. "You think I need you to testify, Julian?" I said, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. "I do not need a bankrupt, desperate white knight to save me in a courtroom. I have an army of Manhattan lawyers and a mountain of ironclad evidence. Your testimony is completely worthless to me." "Maya, please." Julian begged, his facade completely shattering. "The FBI is auditing my accounts on Monday. I am going to lose everything." "Then you better start getting used to the color orange," I replied smoothly. "Do not ever call this number again. And Julian, I highly suggest you stay right next to Chloe. Do not break off the engagement just yet. You really do not want to miss what happens next, because the best part of the play has not even started yet." 3 days after their Thanksgiving plans collapsed, my parents launched a desperate counterattack. I was sitting at the head of the massive obsidian conference table in the J Trust corporate headquarters. I was in the middle of a highly sensitive review with 3 international stakeholders. The atmosphere was completely professional. Then, without warning, the heavy glass doors of my conference room were violently shoved open. My mother, Margaret, marched inside wearing a bright crimson designer dress. My father, Richard, followed closely behind her. Chloe trailed them, clutching a designer handbag, looking entirely too smug for a woman who had just lost $19 million. Bringing up the rear was a short, sweating man wearing a cheap gray suit and carrying a bulging leather briefcase. He had the desperate energy of a strip mall lawyer. My stakeholders stopped mid-sentence, staring in absolute shock at the chaotic intrusion. I did not flinch. I simply took a slow sip of my chamomile tea and waited for the performance to begin. Margaret slammed her hands down on the polished obsidian table, glaring at me. "The charade is officially over, Maya," she announced loudly. "We are ending this ridiculous power trip right now." The sweaty lawyer stepped forward. "Miss Williams," he began, "I represent your parents and sister. We are here to formally inform you that we are filing an injunction in federal court to have you removed as executive director of the Josephine Trust. We have irrefutable proof that you are entirely unfit to manage a financial portfolio of this magnitude." The lawyer unlatched his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of glossy photographs, throwing them forcefully across the conference table. The pictures scattered everywhere, sliding under the noses of my stakeholders. I looked down at the images. They were invasive shots taken outside my architectural salvage yard. There were pictures of me wearing grease-stained denim overalls, my face covered in soot and sawdust. There were shots of me lifting heavy, rotting wooden beams out of my rusted pickup truck. There were close-ups of my steel-toed boots caked in mud as I dug through demolished building materials. Chloe stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at the scattered photographs. "Look at her," Chloe told my business partners, her voice dripping with disgust. "She is a manual laborer. She digs through literal garbage for a living. She lives in filth and dust. Do you honestly believe a woman who lives like a scavenger has the mental capacity, the education, or the moral standing to manage $19 million? Aunt Josephine was clearly suffering from severe dementia when she handed the trust over to a working-class fraud. The lawyer slammed his fist on the table. "We are prepared to release these humiliating photographs to the local press by noon today," he threatened. "We will completely destroy your professional reputation. We will expose you as an unstable junk collector who manipulated a dying woman. The court will strip you of your title. However, my clients are willing to be generous. If you sign full control of the trust over to Chloe right now, we will bury these photos and walk away quietly." The silence in the conference room was heavy. My parents stood tall, radiating arrogant victory. They genuinely believed that exposing my blue-collar roots would shame me into submission. They thought the threat of high society embarrassment would make me crumble, just like it would have crumbled them. I looked at the photographs of myself working hard, building my own empire with my bare hands. I felt absolutely no shame. I felt nothing but profound pride. I turned to my stakeholders and offered them a polite smile. "Gentlemen, I apologize for this unexpected interruption," I said calmly. "If you would please excuse us for a few moments, I need to handle a minor family pest control issue." The stakeholders quickly gathered their tablets and exited the room without a single word. Once the glass doors clicked shut behind them, I set my teacup down. I reached under the table and pressed a hidden security button. Instantly, the transparent glass walls of the conference room frosted over, turning completely opaque white. The electronic locks on the doors engaged with a loud, definitive click. We were completely sealed inside. Margaret faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice losing its aggressive edge. I did not answer her. Instead, I nodded toward the private side door connected to my executive suite. The door opened smoothly. Out stepped David, my lead corporate litigator, followed by 3 of the most ruthless, expensive lawyers in Manhattan. They wore bespoke suits that made Richard Hired Gun look like a complete amateur. They moved with the lethal precision of a pack of wolves cornering their prey. David walked straight to the table, his expression completely blank. He picked up one of the glossy photos of me carrying a wooden beam. He stared at it for a second, let out a dismissive chuckle, and casually tossed it into the trash can. Richard's face flushed with anger. "Who the hell do you think you are?" my father demanded. David ignored him completely. He reached into the interior pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek silver USB drive. He placed it gently onto the center of the obsidian table. "Mr. Richard, Mrs. Margaret David," said his voice dripping with absolute menace. "Before you march into a federal courtroom and attempt to sue my client for lacking the proper moral standing and capacity to manage this trust, we highly suggest you review the legal evidence of your own moral character." Chloe frowned, staring at the silver drive. "What is that?" she snapped. David smiled, a cold expression that sent a visible shiver down my mother's spine. "That," David replied softly, "is the exact unedited voicemail your mother left on my client private phone the night before Thanksgiving. Shall we listen to it together?" David did not wait for my parents to give their permission. He simply reached forward and plugged the sleek silver USB drive into the hidden media console embedded in the center of the obsidian conference table. The state-of-the-art surround sound system mounted in the ceiling hummed to life with a soft electronic pulse. My father lunged forward, his hand outstretched to rip the drive from the port. But one of my security personnel stepped out from the shadows of my private suite and placed a heavy hand firmly on Richard's shoulder, forcing him back into his leather chair. The room fell dead silent. Then the crisp, unmistakable sound of my mother's voice echoed through the high-fidelity speakers. The recording was crystal clear, capturing every ounce of the venom she had spewed into my voicemail the night before Thanksgiving. Maya, do not even think about packing a bag for this weekend. Margaret recorded voice sneered, the arrogant tone magnified tenfold in the enclosed glass room. Your sister Chloe is bringing Julian Kensington to meet us. His family is high society. They are wealthy, prestigious, and most importantly, they are white. Chloe simply does not want you there. Your profession is a complete disgrace to this respectable African-American family. Do not bring your raggedy, manual laboring face to Aspen and ruin Chloe's future with the Kensington family. Stay in the dirt where you belong. The audio clipped off, plunging the conference room back into a suffocating absolute silence. Margaret's face drained of all color, transforming her skin to an ashen, sickly gray. She raised her trembling hands to her mouth, staring at the speakers as if they had just physically struck her. Chloe stopped breathing altogether, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. She slowly turned her head to look at her mother, watching her $19 million fantasy burn to the ground in real time. Richard swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. He turned frantically to the cheap, sweating lawyer he had dragged into my office. "Do something," Richard hissed through clenched teeth. "Object to this. It is an illegal recording. You cannot use a private voicemail in a federal lawsuit. Tell them it is inadmissible." David buttoned his bespoke suit jacket and leaned over the table, resting his knuckles on the polished obsidian surface. He looked directly at the panicked, sweating lawyer. "You and I both know the laws of this state operate under single-party consent," Counselor David said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. "My client has every legal right to record and preserve voicemails left on her personal device. But more importantly, let us review the exact phrasing of the morality clause established by the late Josephine Williams." David gestured to one of his associates, who immediately slid a highlighted legal document across the table. It stopped perfectly in front of my father. Section 4, Paragraph 2. David recited entirely from memory, his eyes locked on Richard. Should the primary beneficiary or her direct parental guardians engage in any documented behavior that constitutes class-based humiliation, career shaming, or deliberate alienation of Maya Williams from family functions, the beneficiary status of Chloe Williams shall be instantly and irreversibly revoked. David paused, letting the legal jargon settle like a heavy weight on their chests. "You did not just insult my client," David continued smoothly. "You explicitly banned her from a family holiday gathering specifically because of your views on her working-class profession. You stated her manual labor was a disgrace to your social standing. You provided the court with a textbook irrefutable confession of violating the exact parameters Aunt Josephine outlined to protect Maya." The sweaty lawyer in the cheap gray suit stared at the highlighted document. He looked at the USB drive, then at my mother's terrified face. He was a bottom-feeding attorney looking for a quick settlement payout, but he was not completely stupid. He knew a dead end when he saw one. Without saying a single word, the lawyer slowly reached out and gathered his scattered photographs of me in my overalls. He shoved them aggressively back into his bulging leather briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. "What are you doing?" Richard demanded, his voice rising in panic. "We are paying you to fight this. We are going to court to prove Josephine had dementia." The lawyer picked up his briefcase and shook his head, looking at my father with utter disgust. "You lied to me, Richard," the lawyer spat, wiping his sweaty forehead with his sleeve. "You told me you had a foolproof case against a rogue executor. You never mentioned that your own wife left a recorded, legally binding confession, completely violating the trust provisions. No federal judge in the country is going to entertain a dementia claim when you literally provided the opposing counsel with the exact trigger for the disinheritance clause. I am not losing my license over your vanity project. We are entirely done here." The lawyer turned his back on my parents and walked straight to the frosted glass doors. He looked at me, giving a small, defeated nod. I pressed the security button under my desk. The magnetic locks disengaged with a loud click, and the glass doors slid open just enough to let him escape. He rushed out of the room without ever looking back, leaving my family completely defenseless against my legal team. "Do not bother looking for another attorney, Richard," I said, finally breaking my silence. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of any sympathy. You are officially out of time. I nodded to David, who pulled a final heavy document from his portfolio. It bore the raised embossed seal of the federal court. While you were busy printing out pictures of me in the mud to try and intimidate me, David said, sliding the final document forward. My team filed an emergency expedited hearing with the federal probate judge this morning. We presented the audio recording alongside the original trust documents. The judge reviewed the evidence and issued an immediate ruling. Chloe let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, her hands gripping the edge of the obsidian table so hard her knuckles turned white. She knew exactly what words were coming next. The court has officially approved the transfer, David announced, delivering the fatal blow. Chloe Williams, your inheritance rights have been stripped 100%. The $19 million has been permanently and legally transferred into the private, unrestricted accounts of Maya Williams. You have absolutely nothing left. Margaret let out a loud, dramatic wail, burying her face in her arms as she collapsed against the table. Chloe stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, completely unable to process the magnitude of her loss. The $19 million was gone. The fake empire they had built their entire identities around had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. I pressed the security button under my desk one last time. The opaque frosting on the glass walls instantly cleared, turning transparent once again. The doors unlocked and slid wide open, signaling that this meeting was officially over. Just as the heavy glass doors parted, a figure stepped into the opening. It was Julian. He was wearing his usual tailored suit, holding a leather portfolio. He had clearly followed my family to the corporate building, waiting in the lobby to eavesdrop and see if Chloe would actually secure the funds he so desperately needed to save his bankrupt real estate project. He stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of Chloe sobbing and my mother weeping on the table, realizing exactly what had just happened. Julian stood completely frozen in the threshold of my conference room. The automated glass doors had parted just in time for him to hear my lead attorney deliver the final, crushing blow. He heard that Chloe had been legally stripped of her entire inheritance. He heard that $19 million had been permanently transferred into my private accounts. The timing could not have been more cinematic if I had scripted it myself. Chloe saw him standing there. In her delusional, pampered mind, her wealthy white knight had arrived to save her from this nightmare. She scrambled up from the floor, her designer dress wrinkled and stained with her own panicked tears. She ran toward him, her arms outstretched, desperate for the comfort and protection she believed his status provided. "Julian, please help me," she sobbed, her voice high and breathless. "Maya is stealing everything. She is ruining our future. Do something. Tell your lawyers to fix this." She reached out, expecting him to wrap his arms around her, to pull her against his bespoke suit and shield her from the brutal reality of the room. But Julian did not open his arms. His face, usually arranged in a mask of charming, aristocratic warmth, went completely dead. It was terrifying how quickly a person could drop their disguise when there was no longer any money on the line. As Chloe grabbed the lapels of his jacket, Julian moved with violent speed. He shoved her away. He pushed her so hard that she stumbled backward, her high heels twisting underneath her. She hit the floor hard, staring up at him in absolute shock. "Do not touch me," Julian snarled. The polished gentleman was entirely gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate con artist. He looked at my sister as if she were a disease, brushing his jacket where her hands had just been. "Julian, what are you doing?" Chloe whimpered, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. "I love you. We are getting married." Julian let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely zero humor. He unbuttoned the cuff of his crisp white shirt. He unclasped the heavy silver watch from his wrist. This was the engagement gift my parents had presented to him at the country club just a month ago. They had bragged to all their friends that it was a rare vintage timepiece, a symbol to welcome him into our successful African-American family. Julian held the watch between his fingers for a second, his lip curling in disgust. Then he chucked it forcefully across my obsidian conference table. It hit the hard surface with a loud, hollow clatter, sliding right past my mother and coming to a stop near my teacup. "I took that piece of garbage to a jeweler on Fifth Avenue yesterday," Julian said, his voice dripping with pure contempt. It is a cheap counterfeit. A fake. Just like every single person in this pathetic family. My father Richard opened his mouth to object, but Julian cut him off, pointing a sharp finger at him. "Shut your mouth, Richard," Julian barked. "You people told me I was marrying a $19 million heiress. You flaunted your mountain cabins and your fake designer clothes. You acted like you were untouchable royalty. Meanwhile, your entire life is built on debt and lies. I am facing my own financial nightmare, and I thought marrying your daughter would save me. But you are broker than I am. I do not have the time or the patience to play happy family with a bunch of bankrupt frauds pretending to be high society." Chloe let out a devastating, gut-wrenching wail. She collapsed onto the cold glass floor, her hands covering her face. She was completely broken. The fantasy she had built her entire identity around, the wealthy white husband, the $19 million, the elevated social status, had all vanished into thin air in under 5 minutes. Julian did not even spare her a second glance. He turned his cold, calculating eyes toward me. He looked at the calm, silent woman sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by expensive lawyers and absolute security. He realized I had seen through his scam from the very beginning. I had played the game better than he ever could. "You win, Maya," he said flatly. Then he turned on his heel and walked out of the frosted glass doors. He strode down the hallway and disappeared into the elevator. He did not look back. He did not care that the woman he had promised to marry was screaming his name on the floor behind him. I sat in my chair, sipping my chamomile tea, watching my sister weep. I expected my mother to rush to her golden child. I expected Margaret to hold Chloe, to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be all right. Instead, Margaret did something that made the entire room freeze. She did not go to Chloe. She dropped to her knees right where she stood. She began to crawl across the polished floor. Her expensive crimson dress dragged against the ground as she bypassed her weeping favorite daughter entirely. She made her way straight to my chair. Margaret grabbed my ankles with trembling, sweaty hands. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, stripping away every single ounce of her pride and arrogance. "Elena," she cried out, using the affectionate childhood nickname she had not spoken in over a decade. "Elena, my sweet, smart girl. Please. I am so sorry. I was wrong. We were all so wrong. You are the strong one. You always were." I looked down at the woman who had banned me from Thanksgiving just days ago. I felt absolutely nothing. "You can keep the $19 million. Margaret sobbed, her voice echoing with raw, unadulterated panic. "You deserve it, Elena. You earned it. But please, I am begging you on my hands and knees as your mother. You have to lend us $3 million right now." I raised an eyebrow, staring down at her tear-streaked face. "If we do not get $3 million by tomorrow morning," Margaret wailed, gripping my legs tighter, "the bank is going to take everything. We will lose the house we are living in. We will be thrown out on the street. Please, Elena, save us." I looked down at the woman who had banned me from Thanksgiving just days ago. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. I slowly stood up from my leather executive chair, forcing Margaret to release her frantic grip on my ankles. I took a deliberate step back, smoothing the pristine fabric of my tailored trousers. "Lose the house?" I asked, my brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "What house, Margaret? You and Richard went completely bankrupt 2 years ago. I bought the Aspen cabin from the bank specifically to keep a roof over your heads. No legitimate banking institution in this country would approve you for a credit card, let alone a multi-million-dollar mortgage. Where on earth did you manage to get a $3 million debt?" Margaret stayed on the floor, her hands shaking violently as she covered her tear-streaked face. She could not bring herself to answer. She just sobbed, a pathetic, hollow sound that echoed off the frosted glass walls of my conference room. I turned my gaze to my father. Richard was standing frozen near the frosted glass door, looking exactly like a man facing a firing squad. His broad shoulders, usually thrown back in arrogant pride, were completely slumped. The polished high society patriarch was entirely gone. "Answer the question," Richard Fye commanded. My voice slicing through the heavy silence. "Where did you get $3 million? Richard swallowed hard, avoiding the intense stares of my legal team. We took out a shadow loan. He finally confessed, his voice barely a hoarse whisper. Hard money lenders. Predatory financiers who do not look at credit scores or bank records. We used our country club memberships, our last remaining luxury vehicles, and a collection of fake art as collateral. But mostly we promised them the Josephine Trust. We showed them the old will. We guaranteed them that Chloe was about to inherit $19 million, and we promised to pay them back with 30% interest by the end of the month. The sheer magnitude of their stupidity hung heavily in the air. David, my lead attorney, actually let out a sharp sigh of disbelief, shaking his head at the absolute recklessness of their actions. And what exactly did you do with $3 million of illegal high-interest cash? I asked, though the sickening truth was already beginning to form clearly in my mind. Richard looked at Chloe, who was still slumped on the floor listening to her father's confession in absolute horror. Julian told us his real estate project was hitting a temporary roadblock. Richard explained, his voice shaking with deep shame. He said his prestigious family was evaluating our financial standing. He made it clear that if we wanted him to propose to Chloe, if we wanted to merge our family with the Kensington name, we needed to prove we were equal partners. He asked for an angel investment, to show good faith. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the astronomical level of their betrayal. You gave him the money, I stated flatly. You took out a life-destroying loan from predatory loan sharks, and you handed $3 million in untraceable cash to a man you met barely 6 months ago. We thought it was an investment. Margaret cried out from the floor, lifting her head to look at me with desperate, pleading eyes. We thought he was going to make Chloe a Kensington. We thought as soon as the Josephine Trust cleared, we could just pay off the shadow lenders, and everything would be perfect. We did it for the family, Elena. We did it to secure our legacy. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped my lips. I looked at the 3 people who shared my blood, feeling a profound sense of alienation. The hypocrisy was so deeply toxic it was almost suffocating. For the family, I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You banned me from Thanksgiving dinner because I wear steel-toed boots to work. You called me a disgrace to our respectable African-American family because I earn my living doing honest manual labor. You treated me like a repulsive disease that needed to be hidden away in the shadows. Yet you eagerly jeopardized your entire existence to appease a white con artist. You bent over backward, destroyed your own future, and handed $3 million to a criminal who flashed a fake vintage watch and promised you entry into a high society world that does not even want you. Chloe let out a devastated wail, pressing her hands over her ears as if she could physically block out the truth. She had been sold out by her own parents' vanity, and she had eagerly participated in her own destruction. We made a mistake, Margaret begged, crawling a few inches closer to me. The lenders are calling us every single hour, Elena. They are threatening to send people to the house. They are going to take the cars, the furniture, everything. They might even hurt your father. Please, you have $19 million sitting in your accounts right now. $3 million is absolutely nothing to you. You can make this entire nightmare go away with one phone call. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me. I saw no maternal love in her eyes. I saw no genuine remorse for the decades of emotional abuse she had inflicted upon me. I only saw a desperate, cornered animal trying to use my newfound wealth as a shield against her own catastrophic vanity. She actually believed that family loyalty, the very concept she had weaponized and denied me my entire life, would magically compel me to save them. She thought the guilt of seeing my parents ruined would break my resolve. I smiled. It was a cold, painful, and chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. I buttoned the center button of my tailored blazer, standing tall and utterly untouchable in the center of the corporate empire I had built. So you sold your very souls and our very home to buy a gold-digging son-in-law? I said, every word dripping with absolute finality. You threw away your flesh and blood for the illusion of a prestigious white surname. And now, after telling me to stay in the dirt where I belong, you demand I use my own hard-earned money to pay for your monumental stupidity. Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find a counter-argument to my absolute rejection. He realized that begging for the money based on their own reckless financial decisions was completely failing. The business approach was useless. The parental authority approach had been entirely shattered. So, like any desperate manipulator backed into a corner, my father pivoted to his very last resort. He reached for the heavy, suffocating weapon of cultural guilt and family honor. Maya, listen to yourself, Richard said, lowering his voice to a smooth, pastoral register that he usually reserved for Sunday mornings at our local congregation. You are talking about letting your own flesh and blood lose their home. Do you honestly want the entire African American community in this city to look at our family and see us tearing each other apart? Do you know what the people at the church will say? They will say we finally got a piece of real wealth and we used it to destroy our own people. You are going to make us a laughingstock. This is about the honor of our family line. We have to protect our community image. We have to stick together against the outside world. I sat back in my chair and stared at him. The sheer audacity of his words was almost impressive. For my entire life, my parents had desperately tried to distance themselves from anything that felt too ordinary or grounded. They chased white validation country club memberships and aristocratic illusions. Now, when they were completely bankrupt, my father suddenly wanted to weaponize our racial identity and our church community to guilt-trip me into handing over $3 million. I placed both of my hands flat on the polished obsidian table and leaned forward. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Family honor. I repeated, my voice deadly quiet, but carrying across the glass room like a physical strike. You have the absolute nerve to stand in my office and preach to me about family honor and community solidarity. Let me remind you what your version of family honor looks like, Richard. Your honor is banning your own daughter from the Thanksgiving dinner table because she wears protective work gear and boots. Your honor is telling me my honest, hard-working profession is a disgrace to your social climbing fantasies. Your honor is throwing away your entire life savings and your own home to impress a white con artist who treated you like absolute garbage the second he realized you were broke. Margaret let out a sharp, offended gasp, but I did not stop. Do not you dare use our church, our community, or our heritage as a shield for your own disgusting greed? I commanded, my voice rising with absolute authority. You do not care about the community. You care about your country club status. You care about the imported leather seats in your cars. You care about pretending you are better than the working-class people you step on every single day. And I refuse to fund your pathetic illusion for 1 second longer. Not with $3 million. Not with a single solitary cent. Richard's face twisted into a mask of ugly, venomous hatred. He finally realized that the dutiful, quiet daughter they had bullied for 31 years was completely gone. I was entirely untouchable. I reached over to my desk console and pressed the red intercom button. Yes, Miss Williams. My head of building security answered instantly, his voice echoing through the speaker. Marcus, I need you to bring a full security detail up to the executive conference room immediately. I instructed, never taking my eyes off my father. I have 3 hostile trespassers who need to be escorted out of the building. Right away, ma'am, Marcus replied. You cannot do this! Margaret shrieked, panic overtaking her completely. She tried to grab the edge of the table again, but my father pulled her back. Maya, you are signing our death warrant. Those lenders are going to destroy us. I stood up and buttoned my blazer. You signed your own death warrant the moment you put your house up as collateral for a fake prince, I said coldly. Enjoy the real world, mother. I hear it builds character. Less than 30 seconds later, the frosted glass doors slid open. Marcus and 3 towering, broad-squared security guards stepped into the room. They wore dark suits and earpieces, radiating absolute, uncompromising authority. It is time to leave, Marcus said, gesturing toward the open doorway. Richard tried to square his shoulders and maintain some shred of his patriarchal dignity. Do not touch us, he snapped at the guards. We know the way out. But there was no dignity left to salvage. The security guards flanked them tightly, forcing my parents and my sister to march out of the conference room and into the main executive hallway. I followed slowly behind them, watching the grand finale of their absolute social destruction. The hallway was lined with floor-to-ceiling glass offices. Dozens of my high-level executives, financial analysts, and corporate partners stood at their desks watching the spectacle unfold. The Williams family, who had built their entire existence on the illusion of aristocratic grace, were being publicly marched out of a corporate headquarters like common criminals. Margaret tried to hide her tear-streaked face behind her expensive handbag. Richard stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. They were being humiliated in front of the exact type of wealthy, successful people they had spent their entire lives trying to impress. As they reached the bank of elevators at the end of the long hallway, Chloe suddenly dug her heels into the carpet. She violently shoved one of the security guards away and spun around to face me. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup was running down her cheeks in dark streaks, and her eyes burned with an unhinged feral hatred. "You are going to deeply regret this," Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing wildly across the quiet professional office floor. "Do you honestly think I will let you sit up here in your glass castle with my $19 million? Do you think I will just roll over and let you live in peace while I lose everything? I swear to God, Maya, I will make you pay for what you did today. I will destroy your entire life." I stopped a few feet away from her, completely unfazed by her pathetic temper tantrum. I looked at my furious, bankrupt sister and offered her a slow, chilling smile. "You are welcome to try, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "But I highly suggest you save your energy. You are going to need it to pack up your bedroom before the bank throws your things onto the sidewalk." Marcus grabbed Chloe by the arm and firmly guided her into the waiting elevator compartment alongside my deeply humiliated parents. The heavy steel doors slid shut, cutting off her hysterical screaming and sending them all plunging down to the ground floor. The battle was completely over, but I knew the war was just entering its final, most devastating phase. The heavy steel doors of the executive elevator slid shut, sealing away the frantic screams of my sister. The quiet professionalism of my corporate office immediately returned, but I knew my family too well to believe their silence would last. They had lost the legal, financial, and private battles. When narcissistic people lose their grip on reality behind closed doors, they run to the public square to build a new one. By the time I poured myself a cup of tea the next morning, the digital smear campaign was in full swing. Margaret and Chloe orchestrated a calculated, weaponized media blitz across every platform. Chloe posted a heavily edited video on Instagram, sitting on the floor of her childhood bedroom, wearing an oversized sweater and no makeup to look fragile and devastated. She wept directly into the camera, claiming her vicious, estranged sister had used corporate lawyers to manipulate a dying elderly aunt and steal her inheritance. She told her followers that I maliciously sabotaged her engagement to Julian out of pure jealousy, driving her wealthy fiancé away with fabricated financial documents. My mother took her performance straight to the congregation. Margaret flooded the private Facebook groups of our massive community church with lengthy scripture-laced paragraphs playing the ultimate victim. She painted me as the prodigal daughter who returned only to evict her elderly parents. She claimed I was using my wealth to throw my own flesh and blood onto the freezing winter streets. She deliberately targeted the pride of the African American church community, leveraging their deep-rooted values of family loyalty against me to mask her own monumental greed. It did not take long for the social pressure to mount. My personal phone began ringing relentlessly. Extended relatives I had not spoken to in over a decade suddenly felt entitled to lecture me about morality. I received text messages from second cousins demanding to know how I could sleep at night while my parents faced homelessness. The deacons from my parents' church left lengthy, condescending voicemails. They told me that wealth changes a person, that blood is thicker than water, and that God would judge me harshly for my cruel actions. The sheer hypocrisy was staggering. None of these people had ever reached out when my parents openly mocked my blue-collar profession. None of these church members had ever checked on me when I was working 16-hour days covered in sawdust. They were entirely willing to ignore decades of emotional abuse, but the second $19 million was on the line. Suddenly, everyone was an expert on family loyalty and divine forgiveness. My lead attorney, David, walked into my office on the third day of the smear campaign. He dropped a thick tablet onto my desk, the screen displaying yet another one of Chloe's dramatic, tear-filled social media posts. This is escalating, Maya, David said, his brow furrowed in genuine professional concern. They are actively damaging your public character. We have the audio recording of your mother explicitly insulting you. We have the financial documents proving they took out a predatory shadow loan to fund a con artist. Give me the authorization and I will release a public statement. We can leak the audio anonymously. We can shut down this entire narrative by the end of the business day. Let me destroy their public credibility just like we destroyed their legal case. I looked at the tablet. Chloe was staring into the camera lens, crying about how she had to cancel her dream wedding because of her greedy sister. I reached out and gently closed the tablet cover, plunging the screen into darkness. I looked up at my fiercely loyal attorney and shook my head. No, David, I replied, my voice steady and completely unbothered. We are not going to release a single thing. We are not going to issue a public statement, and we are certainly not going to leak any audio recordings to the internet. David looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Maya, they are turning your entire community against you. They are playing the victims. Let them play the victims, I said, leaning back in my executive chair. Let them scream and cry on the internet. Let them gather all the sympathy they can possibly carry. The truth does not need to argue on social media, David. When you hold all the power, you do not need to raise your voice or defend your character to strangers who do not matter. They are putting on a grand, dramatic performance because it is the absolute only currency they have left. Let them freely act out their little play. The final curtain call is coming soon. David studied my face for a long moment, slowly realizing that I was operating on a completely different level of strategy. He nodded once, picking up his tablet. You are waiting for the inevitable. I am just waiting for the math to catch up to their lies. I corrected him with a cold, knowing smile. I kept my word. I maintained an absolute terrifying silence. I did not block the incoming hateful messages. I did not respond to a single church member. I simply went to work, managed my multi-million-dollar trust, and watched my family spin their web of digital lies tighter and tighter around their own throats. They basked in the digital sympathy, entirely convinced that they had successfully painted me as the villain of the story. But sympathy cannot pay off a predatory shadow loan. Internet likes cannot stop a high-interest foreclosure. Exactly 1 week later, the digital fantasy violently collided with cold, hard reality. Early Tuesday morning, a sleek black vehicle pulled up to the sprawling, manicured driveway of my parents' leased mansion. 2 stern, heavily armed county sheriffs stepped out, accompanied by an agent from the primary shadow lending institution. They marched straight up the grand stone steps, completely ignoring the elaborate holiday decorations framing the doorway. With heavy, definitive strikes, they hammered a bright yellow legal document directly onto the center of the custom oak front door. It was a formal notice of foreclosure and immediate seizure. The grace period was officially over. The lenders wanted their $3 million, and they were taking the house to get it. Every single lie my family had posted online was about to be violently shattered by a very public, very undeniable piece of yellow paper. The bright yellow foreclosure notice taped to their custom oak front door completely shattered every lie my family had posted online. The bank gave them exactly 7 days to pack their belongings before the property would be seized and padlocked. 7 days to vacate the luxurious facade they had destroyed their lives to maintain. The high society friends who eagerly shared Chloe's tearful posts suddenly vanished. Nobody offered them a guest room or a single dollar. Their entire social circle treated their financial ruin like a highly contagious disease. With 0 options left, and the clock ticking down to eviction, they were forced to come crawling back to the place they viciously mocked weeks earlier. It was a busy Tuesday afternoon at my salvage yard. The warehouse was filled with the loud hum of electric saws and the scent of cut timber. My team of skilled carpenters and restoration experts were working on a major commercial contract. I was reviewing blueprints near the loading dock with my shop foreman when a battered taxi pulled up to the gravel entrance. Margaret, Richard, and Chloe stepped out into the cold winter air. They looked completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, untouchable aristocrats from Thanksgiving were gone. They looked exhausted, disheveled, and completely hollowed out by their own failures. Margaret did not waste a single second. The moment she spotted me standing in my protective work gear, she launched into the performance of a lifetime. She marched straight into the dusty workshop, ignoring the heavy machinery on the floor. Right in the middle of the shop floor, surrounded by my employees, my mother dramatically collapsed. She dropped to her knees into a pile of thick pine sawdust. She threw her head back and let out a devastating, theatrical wail that cut right through the noise of the power tools. "Maya, please," Margaret screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I am begging you, have mercy on your own flesh and blood. The bank is throwing us out on the freezing streets. We have absolutely nowhere to go. You cannot let your own parents become homeless. Please, Maya, look at me. I am on my knees begging for your forgiveness." She was deliberately screaming as loud as possible, desperately trying to weaponize the presence of my employees. She genuinely believed that creating a massive, embarrassing public spectacle would force me into submission. She thought I would quickly hand over the money just to save face in front of my staff. Chloe stood a few feet behind her, wiping her own eyes, trying to look like a traumatized victim rather than the greedy architect of this entire disaster. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush forward to comfort the woman kneeling in the dirt. I simply rolled up my blueprints and handed them to my foreman. I gave him a calm, definitive nod. The foreman immediately blew a sharp whistle, signaling the rest of the crew. Within seconds, the electric saws powered back up. My employees completely ignored the sobbing woman on the floor and went right back to their duties. I had already briefed my entire staff about the situation. They knew exactly who these people were, and they held absolutely zero sympathy for them. I walked slowly toward my mother, my heavy steel-toed boots crunching against the gravel. I stopped right in front of her, looking down at the ruin of her pride. I reached into the front pocket of my denim overalls and pulled out a single neatly folded piece of white printer paper. I crouched down slightly and held the paper out to her. Margaret stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second. Her tear-filled eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. She frantically snatched the paper from my hand, fully expecting to see a certified bank check for $3 million. She unfolded it with trembling hands. Her eyes darted across the printed text, and the fragile hope in her expression instantly morphed into absolute, unadulterated horror. It was not a check. It was a printed list. I had compiled the names and addresses of 5 highly rated income-restricted apartment complexes on the other side of the city. At the very bottom of the page, I had bolded the toll-free phone number for the County Social Services Emergency Housing Hotline. These facilities specialize in rapid placement for families facing sudden foreclosure. I said, my voice perfectly level and entirely professional. The one on Elm Street is located directly next to a public bus stop, which will be very convenient since the shadow lenders are going to repossess your luxury cars by Friday. I suggest you call them immediately. The waiting lists fill up very quickly during the winter months. Richard's face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. He stepped forward and violently slapped the piece of paper right out of Margaret's hand. The list fluttered through the air and landed in the sawdust. "You are a cold-blooded monster," Richard roared, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly at my face. "You are standing there mocking us while our entire world falls apart. Do you have any idea what is inside that house? Do you know how many priceless antiques, custom furniture pieces, and irreplaceable family heirlooms are sitting in those rooms right now? We spent decades collecting those valuables to build our family legacy. And now the bank is going to seize every single piece of it. They are going to take it all." I looked at my father, watching the veins bulge in his neck as he screamed about his precious material possessions. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I tilted my head, looking him dead in the eye. "I know exactly what is inside that house, Richard," I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper, "because the bank just hired my company to be the lead appraiser and exclusive liquidator for all that junk." 3 days passed since the yellow foreclosure notice was hammered onto my parents' custom oak front door. The reality of their financial ruin had settled over their leased mansion like dust. I arrived at the property just after 9 in the morning. I pulled up the sweeping driveway in my company heavy-duty salvage truck. The bold logo of my architectural appraisal firm was emblazoned across the doors. I stepped out of the cab wearing my signature denim overalls, steel-toed boots, and carrying a heavy aluminum clipboard. I was back in the exact working-class uniform my family had viciously mocked just weeks earlier. But today, I was not a target for their cruelty. I was the chief appraiser appointed directly by the lending institution that now owned their entire lives. I walked up the grand stone steps and pushed open the front door. The interior of the house was a portrait of frantic despair. Suitcases were bursting with designer clothes. Margaret, Richard, and Chloe stood in the center of the grand living room, looking like cornered animals. When they saw me walk through the door wearing my protective work gear, their faces contorted with profound shock. They had spent my entire life telling me manual labor was a disgusting disgrace to our respectable African-American family. Now they were completely powerless, forced to watch the daughter they despised strip them of everything they owned. I unclipped a stack of neon red seizure tags from my clipboard and looked directly at my father. "Good morning, Richard," I said, my voice echoing coldly off the high vaulted ceilings. "As you were informed yesterday, my firm has been contracted as the exclusive liquidator for this estate. I am here to personally appraise, catalog, and tag every single item of value in this house to offset your massive shadow loan debt. Anything bearing a red tag is officially property of the bank. You are legally forbidden from removing it from these premises." My father's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. He stared at my steel-toed boots, his pride bleeding out onto the marble floor. "You are enjoying this," he spat, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You orchestrated this entire setup just to come here and gloat while we lose our home." "I did not orchestrate your terrible financial decisions," I replied smoothly, peeling the first red tag from its backing. "I am simply doing my job. The very same job you told me would humiliate Chloe in front of her high society friends." I walked past him and slapped the bright red sticker directly onto a massive antique grandfather clock standing in the hallway. "It is just business." For the next 2 hours, I moved methodically through the sprawling mansion. My team of workers followed closely behind me, cataloging heavy furniture, imported rugs, and crystal chandeliers. My parents and sister trailed us like ghosts, wincing every time my boots stepped onto their pristine carpets, and a red tag was slapped onto another piece of their precious social climbing armor. We eventually reached the formal dining room. Margaret rushed forward, her eyes wide with panic, as I approached a large ornate ceramic vase, displayed prominently on a custom pedestal. She had bragged for years that it was a priceless Ming Dynasty artifact imported from Europe. She used that vase to assert her dominance over the other women in our community. "Please, Maya," Margaret begged, stepping in front of the pedestal. "Leave the vase. It is a sacred family heirloom. It has been in my private collection for decades. The bank does not need to take my historical artifacts." I gently pushed my mother aside. I picked up the heavy ceramic vase, turning it over to inspect the base. I ran my thumb over the supposedly ancient glaze, recognizing the telltale signs of modern manufacturing instantly. I pulled a magnifying loupe from my pocket and checked the maker mark hidden beneath the paint. I let out a dry, amused sigh and set the vase back down on the pedestal. I peeled off a red tag and pressed it firmly onto the smooth ceramic surface. "Fake," I announced, speaking loudly enough for my entire crew and my family to hear. "It is a mass-produced industrial replica manufactured in a modern factory somewhere in Ohio. It is not an antique. It is certainly not a historical artifact. The estimated liquidation value at auction is exactly $50. Margaret let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth as my workers chuckled quietly behind me. The grand illusion of her aristocratic wealth was being dismantled piece by piece right before her very eyes. I moved through the rest of her highly publicized art collection, exposing cheap replicas and overpriced counterfeit paintings that had no real market value. They had built their entire high society image on smoke and mirrors. I was brutally pricing their empty vanity for the world to see. I left Margaret weeping quietly next to her fake vase and walked back toward the main living room to finish the inventory check. The room was cluttered with open moving boxes as my family scrambled to pack their permitted clothing. I stood near the grand fireplace, checking off items on my ledger. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a suspicious movement near the glass display cabinets. I subtly shifted my position using the reflection of the living room mirror to watch the corner. Chloe was standing with her back to me, breathing heavily and glancing nervously over her shoulder to make sure nobody was watching her. She reached out and grabbed a small velvet box from the top shelf of the display case. It was a rare diamond necklace strictly marked for seizure. I watched in the mirror as my sister quickly unclasped her designer handbag. With trembling hands, she shoved the velvet diamond box deep into the bottom of her purse to hide the stolen asset. I stepped away from the fireplace, my heavy boots making no sound on the thick Persian rug, as I moved toward the entryway. Chloe turned around, clutching her designer handbag against her chest, her eyes darting toward the front door. She took 2 hurried steps before crashing right into me. I stood firmly in her path, crossing my arms over my heavy denim overalls. "Going somewhere so quickly, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm. She gasped, stumbling backward, as if she had hit a brick wall. "I am just leaving," she stammered, her voice pitching an octave higher than normal. "I am going to the car to wait for Mom and Dad. Move out of my way, Maya." I extended my hand, palm facing up. "Hand over the purse." Chloe clutched the bag even tighter, her knuckles turning bone white against the expensive leather. "No. This is my personal property. You have absolutely no right to touch my things." My mother heard the commotion and came rushing out of the formal dining room. Margaret threw herself between me and her golden child, acting like a fierce human shield. "What is the exact meaning of this?" Margaret demanded, glaring at me with the same fiery hatred she had shown at Thanksgiving. "Why are you constantly harassing your sister? Let her pass immediately." "She is not passing anywhere until she empties that bag," I stated coldly. "I saw exactly what she did in the mirror reflection, Margaret. She just stole a diamond necklace from the display case. That specific piece of jewelry was cataloged and tagged 20 minutes ago." Margaret puffed out her chest in arrogant defiance. "She is simply taking back what rightfully belongs to her," Margaret declared, pointing an acrylic nail at my chest. "That necklace was a gift. You are a spiteful, bitter woman, Maya. Are you really going to act as a pathetic lackey for a banking institution? Are you genuinely going to stand there and help a faceless corporation rob your family of our belongings? You are betraying your own blood for a miserable paycheck." I did not waste my breath trying to explain basic morality to a woman who had none. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my work gear, pulled out my smartphone, and opened the camera application. I held it up high, making sure the red recording light was clearly visible, pointing the lens directly at Chloe and her stolen handbag. "That necklace is listed on the master collateral schedule for your shadow loan," I explained, making sure my voice carried clearly over the recording. By placing a seized asset into a personal bag with the direct intent to remove it, Chloe has crossed a massive legal boundary. This is not a simple family dispute, Mother. Concealing and removing seized assets from a foreclosed estate to defraud a lending institution constitutes a major federal crime. Chloe face drained of all color. She looked at the recording phone, then looked at Margaret in absolute panic. Mom, Chloe whimpered, her voice trembling as the horrifying reality of the word federal hit her. "Do something to stop her." Richard sprinted into the hallway, hearing the word crime echoing from the other room. My father stopped dead when he saw my phone recording his youngest daughter clutching stolen property. The final ounce of fight completely drained out of him. He looked at the red recording dot and finally realized his family was entirely out of moves. There were no more lies to tell, no social masks to wear, and no fake wealth to hide behind. The brutal consequence had arrived. "Maya, please," Richard said. His voice was no longer booming or authoritative. It was weak, defeated, and entirely pathetic. He held up his hands in a gesture of absolute surrender and slowly walked toward me, keeping his head slightly bowed. "Put the phone down," he begged, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. "You win. You completely win. You have proven your brilliance. You have proven that you are the strongest, most capable person in this entire bloodline. We were incredibly foolish to ever doubt you or treat you poorly. We see that now." I kept the camera steady, recording his historic, desperate confession. "Please, Maya," Richard pleaded, his voice breaking as he stepped closer. "I am asking you as your father to just let this go. Have Chloe put the necklace back and we can forget this ever happened. You have $19 million in your private accounts. You hold all the power. I am begging you to buy back this house for us. Save us from the streets. If you do this, we will change everything. We will let you be the undisputed head of this family. We will listen to your every word. Just save our legacy and give us a second chance. I looked at them standing in the wide hallway of their crumbling mansion. My father was practically bowing, offering me the crown. My mother was staring at me with desperate, pleading eyes, holding tightly onto her golden child. Chloe was weeping quietly, waiting for the older sister she had viciously mocked to deliver her from a federal prison sentence. They were offering me a kingdom of lies, hoping my deep childhood desire for their validation would override my adult common sense. They actually believed calling me the head of the family would erase 31 years of systemic abuse. I looked into my father's pleading eyes. I did not stop recording. I kept the camera focused on them, using my free hand to tap a number into my smartwatch. The call connected instantly, ringing very loudly. "Hello? Is this the local police dispatch?" I said, my voice echoing with icy, unshakable resolve. "I need to report a crime in progress. Yes, there are 3 individuals currently attempting to conceal and transport high-value assets out of illegally foreclosed and sealed property. Send a marked patrol unit to this address immediately." When dispatch confirmed the address, Chloe shrieked. Her fingers went numb. The velvet box slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a sharp crack. The diamond necklace spilled out, glittering mockingly against the Persian rug. She backed away from it, her chest heaving with absolute panic. "You are a demon!" Margaret screamed at the top of her lungs, her face twisted with pure, unadulterated hatred. She lunged forward, her hands raised like claws, but my security foreman stepped smoothly between us, physically forcing her back. "You are a cold-blooded monster. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. And you are calling the police on your own sister over a piece of jewelry. You will rot in hell for this, Maya. You will burn for what you are doing to your own flesh and blood." I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my pocket. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical screaming. I simply looked down at the diamond necklace on the floor and then looked back at the woman who had banned me from Thanksgiving dinner. "I am just doing my job, Margaret," I replied smoothly. "You wanted me to stay in my working-class place. Well, this is exactly what working-class people do. We follow the rules, we respect the law, we never steal from banks to fund our fake aristocratic lifestyles." Richard grabbed Margaret by the shoulders, pulling her back before she could attempt to attack me again. He looked completely shattered. The proud patriarch who had spent his entire life demanding respect and submission was now shaking uncontrollably in the center of his foreclosed mansion. He knew arguing was entirely pointless. The police were already on their way. Within 5 minutes, the sharp wail of police sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. Red and blue lights flashed through the massive bay windows, casting frantic shadows across the empty moving boxes and red seizure tags covering their precious furniture. I raised my hand, signaling my crew to step back. I walked out the front door, stepping onto the stone porch to meet the responding officers. I presented my corporate identification and the official bank authorization documents. I explained the situation calmly, without emotion. I told them the former owners were highly agitated but dropped the stolen asset when I called dispatch. I asked the officers for a specific favor to resolve the situation without an immediate physical arrest. The officers nodded, hands resting on their utility belts as they followed me back into the foyer. My family huddled near the staircase, their eyes wide with terror, as the uniformed police officers stepped into their home. I stood in front of the officers, clasping my hands behind my back. "I just had a very productive conversation with these gentlemen," I announced, letting my voice carry through the silent house. "Since the stolen asset was dropped and technically never left the premises, I am willing to decline pressing formal charges for theft." Chloe let out a shuddering breath of relief. She leaned against the banister, clutching her chest, but her relief lasted for exactly 2 seconds. However, I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal register. "Your authorized time to vacate this property has officially expired. The bank is taking immediate possession of this estate right now. The officers have graciously agreed to give you exactly 15 minutes. You are permitted to take exactly 3 standard suitcases of basic personal clothing. No jewelry, no electronics, no artwork. If my team finds a single valuable item missing from the master inventory list, when you walk out that door, the officers will place you in handcuffs and transport you to jail. Your 15 minutes starts right now. Total pandemonium erupted. The illusion of their high society grace violently crumbled into pure animalistic panic. Margaret sobbed hysterically as she scrambled up the grand staircase. Chloe tripped over her own feet, crying as she dragged a canvas suitcase down the hall. Richard moved like a zombie, his eyes blank and defeated as he followed his wife to gather whatever pathetic scraps of their life they were allowed to keep. I stood in the foyer with the police officers and watched the most authentic, brutal moment of their entire lives unfold. The people who had called me a disgrace, who sneered at my boots and my dirt, were now frantically shoving underwear into cheap luggage under the threat of a criminal arrest. They were stripped of their vanity. They had nothing left but overwhelming shame. Exactly 14 minutes later, they dragged their 3 suitcases down the stairs. They looked exhausted, broken, and stripped of their arrogance. A cheap, faded yellow taxi pulled into the driveway ordered by one of the police officers, since the Shadowlanders had already repossessed their luxury vehicles. They walked out the front door in total silence. They trudged down the stone steps, dragging luggage across the gravel. The crisp winter wind whipped around them, biting through their thin designer coats. I stood on the top step, my arms crossed over my chest, watching them approach the waiting taxi. Chloe climbed into the back seat without looking at me. Margaret followed, hiding her face behind her hands. Richard opened the passenger door, but before he got inside, he stopped. He turned around and looked up at me, standing on the porch of the house he used to own. His face was a map of profound despair. Maya, Richard called out, his voice cracking violently in the cold air. Are you really going to do this? Are you actually going to stand there and watch your parents freeze? Are you truly going to leave your flesh and blood to starve on the street? I calmly looked down at the broken, desperate man shivering by the open taxi door. I let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face as I carefully prepared my final answer. I am Maya, 31 years old, and my parents banned me from Thanksgiving dinner because my blue-collar job would embarrass my sister's high society boyfriend. I did not scream or cry. I just smiled, handed my mother the keys to our holiday cabin, and told her I completely understood. She left my workshop thinking she won, totally unaware I had just handed her a one-way ticket to public humiliation. She also had no idea I was secretly the executive director of the $19 million trust fund my sister planned to use to secure her perfect engagement. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic family members a lesson they will never forget. The air in my architectural salvage workshop was thick with the smell of aged oak and sawdust. I was restoring a beautiful 19th century mahogany mantelpiece, wearing heavy denim overalls and steel-toed boots covered in grime. That was when the heavy iron door of my shop swung open, letting in a gust of crisp November wind and the sharp, unmistakable scent of expensive Chanel perfume. My mother, Margaret, stepped into the workshop. She was wearing a pristine, cream-colored cashmere coat and a pair of Christian Louboutin heels that clicked sharply against the concrete floor. She immediately pulled a monogrammed silk handkerchief from her designer bag and pressed it against her nose, looking around my workspace as if she had just stepped into a biohazard zone. I set down my sanding block and wiped my hands on a rag, waiting for the inevitable critique. I did not have to wait long. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about my day. She walked straight up to my workbench, keeping a safe distance, so the sawdust would not ruin her immaculate outfit. Do not bother packing a bag for this weekend, Maya. You are not coming to Thanksgiving dinner this year. Her voice was flat, completely devoid of any maternal warmth. I stared at her, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest, but I kept my face perfectly blank. I asked her why I was suddenly uninvited from a holiday tradition we had kept for my entire life. Margaret sighed heavily, rolling her eyes as if my existence was an exhausting burden she was forced to bear. Your sister Chloe is bringing Julian to meet the family. She said his name with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. He is white, he comes from a very prestigious, wealthy family, and Chloe simply does not want you there ruining the image we have worked so hard to build. Julian is used to a certain caliber of people. He is an investor, a man of high society, and what are you? Look at you. You are a manual laborer. You dig through other people's trash for a living. Your blue-collar job and your wretched, unkempt appearance would humiliate her. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. We are a respectable, successful African-American family, Maya. We have an image to uphold in our community. I will not let you drag us down and ruin your sister's chances of marrying into the Kensington family. You are a disgrace to everything your father and I have built. Just stay here in the dirt where you belong. For 31 years, I had been the scapegoat of the Williams family. While Chloe was the golden child showered with praise, expensive clothes, and endless financial bailouts, I was the one whose achievements were constantly belittled. When I built my estate appraisal and architectural salvage business from the ground up, they called it junk collecting. They never bothered to look past the sawdust to see the highly lucrative elite empire I had actually created. I looked at my mother's harsh, unyielding face. A younger version of me would have cried. A younger version of me would have begged for her approval, offering to buy a new dress, promising to sit quietly in the corner and speak only when spoken to. But that girl had died a long time ago. Instead of arguing, I reached into the deep pocket of my denim overalls. I pulled out a heavy silver keyring holding 2 brass keys and tossed it through the air. Margaret caught the keys, automatically pulling her handkerchief away from her face in surprise. "What is this?" she demanded, looking at the brass keys resting in her manicured palm. "Those are the keys to the Aspen Mountain cabin," I said, my voice perfectly steady and calm. "I know you and Dad were planning to host Julian there for the long weekend to show off the family property. I had them polished for you. I understand completely, Mom. I will stay far away from your perfect Thanksgiving." Margaret smiled, a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk spreading across her face. She slipped the keys into her designer handbag. "I'm glad you are finally learning to be reasonable and know your place, Maya. It is for the best." With that, she turned on her red lacquered heels and marched out of my workshop, the heavy iron door slamming shut behind her. She drove away believing she had won. She firmly believed the Aspen cabin belonged to her and my father. She did not know that when they quietly went bankrupt 2 years ago, I was the anonymous buyer who purchased the property from the bank to save them from eviction. I took out my phone and dialed a private number. "Aspen Security," a voice answered. "This is Maya Williams, the property owner," I said, wiping a speck of dust from my screen. "Please change the biometric locks on the main gates immediately. If anyone with the last name Williams attempts to enter the property this Thursday, deny them access and activate the trespass protocol." 6 months passed since the brutal winter stripped away the last remaining illusions of the Williams family. The freezing temperatures eventually thawed into a crisp, bright spring across the city, but the absolute social and financial freeze on my parents and sister remained permanently in place. When you build your entire existence on a foundation of arrogant lies, the collapse does not just break your bank account, it entirely obliterates your reality. I kept my strict no-contact order firmly in place, but in our city, gossip travels faster than the speed of light. I did not need to seek out information about their downfall. The news practically delivered itself to my desk. Chloe had spent her entire 28 years believing she was destined to be a wealthy socialite simply because she existed. Now, her daily reality was a masterclass in profound humiliation. To pay off the mountain of high-interest credit card debt she had accumulated buying designer clothes for her fake aristocratic life, my golden sister was forced to take a minimum-wage job. She now works as a cashier at a fast food franchise on the edge of the city. The girl who used to sneer at my steel-toed boots now spends 40 hours a week wearing a cheap grease-stained polyester uniform and a plastic visor. Her former high society friends, the girls she used to drink expensive mimosas with at the country club, treat her like a walking plague. When they see her walking down the street, they literally cross to the other side to avoid making eye contact. The elite African American church community that once praised her beauty and connections now uses her name as a cautionary tale about the deadly sins of vanity and greed. She is completely isolated, drowning in debt, and forced to ask customers if they want fries with their order. Richard and Margaret faced a similar devastating reality check. Without my financial bailout, they were evicted from their foreclosed mansion and forced to rent a cramped, damp two-bedroom apartment in a decaying building complex. It is the exact type of working-class neighborhood they had spent decades viciously mocking. The smell of imported leather and expensive perfume was permanently replaced by the scent of mildew and cheap cooking oil from the neighboring units. In the beginning, my mother tried to revive her digital smear campaign. She posted long, tear-stained paragraphs on Facebook, begging for community sympathy, claiming they were the innocent victims of a cruel, wealthy daughter. But her digital performance was abruptly shut down by the local press. A prominent investigative journalist for the city newspaper got hold of the public court filings regarding their illegal shadow loans and their attempt to defraud the bank. The article laid out every single humiliating detail. It exposed how Richard and Margaret secretly mortgaged their home to fund a white con artist, all while attempting to steal my $19 million inheritance. Once the truth was printed in black and white, the comments on my mother's social media posts turned entirely hostile. People called them pathetic, greedy frauds. The public shame was so absolute and overwhelming that Margaret permanently deleted all of her social media accounts. They are now trapped in that tiny, damp apartment with no friends, no status, and absolutely no audience left to manipulate. As for Julian, his spectacular downfall was swift and deeply satisfying. Using the vast legal and financial resources of the Josephine Trust, my team cooperated fully with the federal authorities. We handed over every piece of financial documentation detailing his fraudulent real estate schemes and his attempt to extort $5 million from my accounts. His wealthy family immediately cut him off to protect their own remaining assets. Standing in a federal courtroom without a single ally, the fake white knight was officially sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate wire fraud and embezzlement. He traded his bespoke tailored suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. While my former family drowned in the consequences of their own toxic greed, my life accelerated in the exact opposite direction. I did not just sit on Aunt Josephine's $19 million fortune. I applied the same relentless work ethic I used in my dusty workshop and channeled it into high-level corporate investment. Within 6 months, I completely restructured the J-Trust portfolio, investing heavily in emerging commercial real estate and sustainable technology. I successfully doubled the value of the trust, pushing my net worth well past $38 million. I also transformed my humble architectural salvage yard into an absolute empire. I expanded the business into an elite, highly sought-after interior design and custom furniture firm catering exclusively to the ultra-rich. The same high society clients who once attended my parents' fake dinner parties now wait 6 months on a list just to pay me $500,000 to restore their historic estates. I elevated my working-class roots into a mark of undeniable, untouchable luxury. I proved that honest labor, sharp intelligence, and unyielding integrity will always defeat cheap vanity and social climbing. The months rolled by in a blur of massive corporate success and profound personal peace. I built a life surrounded only by people who respected my mind and valued my true character. And then the calendar turned once again. The air grew crisp, the leaves turned brittle and brown, and November arrived with a chilling breeze. It was exactly 1 year to the very day since my mother had marched into my salvage yard and banned me from the family Thanksgiving dinner. I sat comfortably behind the wheel of my brand-new custom-ordered luxury SUV. I was not wearing dusty overalls today. I was dressed in a flawless, tailored cashmere coat. I smiled as I turned the steering wheel, guiding my powerful vehicle up the winding, snow-dusted mountain roads. I was driving straight toward the Aspen cabin, the very same property my family had tried to claim as their own. The stage was perfectly set for the ultimate holiday celebration, and this time, the exclusive guest list was entirely mine. The heavy wooden doors of the Aspen cabin opened, welcoming freezing alpine air that was instantly neutralized by the roaring stone fireplace inside. I stepped over the threshold, brushing snowflakes from my cashmere coat. Warm golden light spilled from vaulted iron chandeliers, casting a rich glow over the exposed timber beams. A 20-foot dining table stretched across the great room, covered in an elegant spread of autumn foliage, flickering candles, and pristine crystal glasses. The mouth-watering aroma of roasted turkey, honey, glazed ham, and sweet potato pie drifted from the kitchen, filling the air with the authentic scent of home. This was finally my house. This was my very own Thanksgiving. I looked around the room at the wonderful people gathering near the warm fire, my heart swelling with profound gratitude. I walked upstairs and changed into a simple floor-length emerald green silk dress. It was incredibly luxurious, but completely devoid of the flashy logos my mother used to wear to prove her worth to strangers. I did not need to wear my bank account on my sleeve. I walked back down the wooden staircase, letting the soft melody of a classic jazz record wash over me. The music was smooth and deeply comforting, setting the perfect tone. The people filling my home tonight were not high society socialites or fake aristocratic investors looking for a shadow loan. They were my actual family. Standing by the kitchen island, laughing loudly with a dark stout in his hand, was Marcus, my salvage yard foreman. He wore a crisp button-down shirt instead of his usual sawdust-covered uniform, but his booming, joyful laugh was exactly the same. Next to him were the master carpenters and restoration experts who had worked tirelessly by my side when I was just a blue-collar worker building a business. They were the people my parents called dirty and disgraceful. Tonight, they were my honored guests, treated to the finest food and drink money could buy. Over by the stone fireplace, my lead attorney David engaged in a relaxed conversation with his legal associates. The ruthless Manhattan wolves who systematically dismantled my parents' fraudulent lawsuit and secured my $19 million empire traded their stiff courtroom suits for comfortable cashmere sweaters. They clinked their glasses together completely at ease, knowing their fierce loyalty earned them a permanent seat at my table. Walking toward me with 2 glasses of vintage red wine was Michael. He handed me a crystal glass, his eyes crinkling with genuine, unconditional affection. Michael was not a wealthy white knight trying to save me, nor a predatory con artist looking for a payout. He was a brilliant, hard-working architect who fell in love with me 3 years ago, back when I was covered in grease and driving a rusted pickup truck. He stood by my side when I had absolutely nothing, long before the trust fund, the penthouse, and the corporate empire. He kissed my forehead gently. I took a slow sip of the rich red wine, letting the warmth settle in my chest. I turned my gaze toward the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the rugged mountain terrain. Outside, the night sky was pitch black and heavy snowflakes fell steadily, blanketing the pine trees in white. The storm outside was fierce, but inside this cabin, protected by the biometric locks I installed a year ago, everything was perfectly secure. I smiled, taking a deep breath of the wood smoke-scented air. My mind drifted back exactly 1 year to the dusty floor of my salvage workshop. I remembered the overwhelming stench of my mother's expensive perfume. I remembered the sharp click of her designer heels as she marched into my workspace. I remembered the absolute disgust on her face as she looked at my work boots, banning me from this very holiday because my existence did not fit her shallow, toxic narrative. Do not bother packing a bag for this weekend, Maya. You are not coming to Thanksgiving dinner this year. Her cold, arrogant voice echoed briefly in my memory, a ghost from a past life that could no longer reach me. I took another long, slow sip of my red wine, staring out into the endlessly falling snow. That is right, I whispered softly to myself. That dinner was never meant for me. Because I deserve to host a much grander dinner in a home where there is absolutely no room for fakeness, manipulation, or conditional love. I turned back to face the great room. Marcus was telling a hilarious story about a botched furniture delivery, making the lawyers double over with laughter. Michael caught my eye and offered a warm, knowing smile. There was no anxiety here, There was no desperate need to perform, no fear of saying the wrong thing, and no exhausting attempt to impress people who fundamentally hated themselves. There was only joy, respect, and profound, authentic peace. I raised my crystal glass high into the air, the deep red wine catching the golden light. The conversations gradually quieted down as my friends, my true chosen family, turned their attention toward me. They raised their own glasses in response, their faces glowing with genuine admiration and love. The smooth, soulful jazz continued to play softly in the background, a beautiful soundtrack to the life I had built with my own hands. I learned the most valuable lesson of my entire existence. The sweetest, most devastating revenge is not found in screaming matches, public confrontations, or watching your enemies lose their homes. True, absolute revenge is simply moving on. It is elevating your own existence, protecting your peace, and living a life so incredibly brilliant, so successful, and so deeply fulfilled that your enemies no longer even have the basic qualifications to stand in the distance and watch you shine. Let us eat and be thankful for exactly what we have, I said brightly, my voice filled with nothing but pure, unadulterated joy and absolute peace. The core lesson of this story is that true vindication does not require screaming matches, begging for love, or sinking to the level of toxic abusers. Instead, the sweetest revenge is found in absolute independence and the establishment of unbreakable boundaries. By refusing to accept cruel judgments, the protagonist reclaims her own narrative and builds an undeniable empire of success. She clearly demonstrates that when you remove your emotional and financial support, greedy people will ultimately orchestrate their own downfall. True power lies in walking away and thriving. Please share your own story about cutting off toxic relatives down below.